My name is Kathleen Moore. I am 68 years old, a retired librarian, and a widow. I thought I had lived long enough to know what betrayal looked like. I was wrong. The phone rang that morning while I was sitting in a doctor's waiting room, surrounded by the hum of other patients coughing, shifting in their chairs. It was my daughter, Lauren. Her voice was sharp, almost rehearsed. "We're leaving tomorrow, Mom. I've sold your beach house. Bye." I froze. 45 summers of laughter and birthdays and Christmas lights at that house, gone with a single sentence. But I did not cry, not this time. Instead, I took a slow breath and answered with a calm that even surprised me. "But you forgot one thing." There was a pause. Her tone wavered. "What are you talking about?" I leaned back against the hard plastic chair and let out a quiet laugh, the kind that comes not from joy, but from finally knowing something the other person does not. Because the house you sold was actually... I did not finish the sentence for her. I let the silence linger, thick and uncomfortable. People around me looked up, sensing something had shifted in the air. The call ended. I held the phone in my hand, heavy like a stone. Not a single tear fell. The betrayal should have shattered me. Instead, it awakened me. And in that stillness, an image rose in my mind, a manila envelope tucked away in the top drawer of my oak dresser at home. My late husband, Frank, had handed it to me 3 days before he passed. His voice echoed, "Open it when you are ready." Lauren thought she had stripped me of everything. What she did not know was that inside that envelope waited the truth, a truth that would turn her triumph into ashes. I sat quietly until the nurse called my name. My legs felt steady. For the first time in months, I was not a grieving widow or a discarded mother. I was a woman holding a secret powerful enough to change everything. When the call ended and the waiting room noise swallowed me again, my mind drifted backward. Grief has a way of replaying memories you wish you could hold in your hands forever. I remembered that morning 8 months ago, the morning Frank died. We had eaten breakfast together just as we had for 45 years. He had poured my coffee with cream, stirred it twice, set it in front of me with that crooked smile of his, and kissed my forehead. "Good morning, my love," he had said. That was the last sentence he ever spoke to me. The steam rose from my cup, swirling upward in a dance of warmth, while across the table he clutched his chest and fell forward. I screamed his name, called 911, pressed my shaking hands against his chest as the dispatcher urged me to keep him breathing. By the time the paramedics arrived, the coffee was still hot on the table, untouched, but my husband was gone. That cup of coffee became my anchor and my torment. For weeks afterward, I would stare at it in my memory, the proof that life could vanish while something as ordinary as a warm drink remained. Lauren was different then. She had been attentive, her voice soft, her arms strong. She held me when I collapsed at the funeral home, helped me choose the flowers, and stood beside me while neighbors offered condolences. She insisted on driving me to the doctor for a checkup. "Mom, you need to take better care of yourself now. You can't fall apart," she had said. Her words were wrapped in what sounded like love. I believed her. I believed she wanted to protect me. She would sit at my kitchen table, folding the mail into neat piles, encouraging me to eat when I had no appetite. She even whispered to me one night as I wept into my pillow, "Don't worry, Mom. I'll always be here." That sentence carved itself into my heart like scripture. For months, I repeated it to myself whenever the silence of the house became unbearable. I thought, yes, she is my daughter. She will not abandon me. She will stand with me, as I stood with her when she was small. But now, after her call, I saw those gestures in a different light. Were they born of love, or were they rehearsals of convenience? At Frank's funeral, I had squeezed Lauren's hand until my knuckles ached. She leaned in and whispered, "Mom, don't worry. You'll be okay." And I answered in a voice cracked with grief, "Con dung la, me se on." In English, it was simple. "Don't worry, I'll be fine." I said it to comfort her, but I think I was really saying it to myself. The echo of that moment lingered even now, sitting in the doctor's office. my promise to her, my promise to me. But how could I be fine when the foundation of my life had been ripped away at a breakfast table? I still see Frank's reading glasses folded neatly by his plate, the newspaper half open to the crossword puzzle, the butter dish waiting for him to spread across his toast. Every detail of that morning is stitched into my memory with unbearable clarity, and yet within that same morning a seed of strength was planted. I survived it. I had lived through the unimaginable. The worst had already happened, and I was still standing. It gave me a strange kind of courage now. If I could endure the death of the man I loved for nearly half a century, then I could endure the betrayal of a daughter who thought she knew the weight of my heart. That hot cup of coffee, frozen in memory, became the motive of my widowhood, proof that life is fragile, that time is cruel, but also that I was still here to drink it. The memory ended as the nurse called my name again, snapping me back to the present. I rose slowly, gripping my purse, and whispered under my breath, "Con Dung Lo, may say on." This time, the words felt different. They no longer belonged to a broken widow. They belonged to a woman who had already begun to gather her quiet strength. After Frank's death, memories came in waves. Some gentle, some fierce, but none stronger than those tied to the beach house. We had bought it when Lauren was 15 after saving every spare dollar for more than 2 decades. It was not grand, just a modest cream-colored cottage with shutters that rattled in the wind and a porch that looked out onto the endless Atlantic. But to us, it was paradise. I remember that first summer. The paint on the porch was peeling, the plumbing groaned with age, and the backyard was little more than sand and stubborn weeds. Yet Frank approached it like a man restoring a cathedral. He replaced tiles one by one, patched the roof, and rebuilt the wooden steps with his own hands. His laughter echoed through the salt air as he hammered and sawed, sweat dripping down his back. He would glance at me, brush his forehead with his sleeve, and grin. "Kate, this place will outlast us if we do it right," he said. I did my part too. I planted flowers along the porch rail, bright marigolds that bent in the breeze and stubborn roses that clung to the fence. Every holiday, I hung garlands and fairy lights, filling the little cottage with color. By Christmas that first year, the house had transformed from a tired relic into a living memory machine. For Lauren, it became her playground, her escape, her stage. She held her 16th birthday party there. The walls shook with music and laughter as she and her friends danced barefoot on the wooden floor. The following Christmas, we hosted cousins, neighbors, and anyone who needed warmth. Frank grilled fish outside while I baked pies, and Lauren's laughter carried over the waves. To her, that house was not just wood and nails. It was her childhood sanctuary, the place where she ran into the ocean with reckless joy, where she whispered secrets to her friends under the stars, where she later brought Edward, the man she thought was her forever. I can still see it. One summer evening when Lauren arrived with Edward for the first time, she was radiant, her cheeks flushed with excitement. She tugged him toward the porch, introducing him to every corner as if unveiling a palace. "This is where Dad makes barbecue," she said, pointing to the grill Frank had built. "And here's Mom's roses. She won't let anyone touch them." Edward smiled politely, shaking Frank's hand and kissing my cheek. But I noticed even then the way his eyes measured things. The truck in the driveway, the sturdiness of the porch, the shine of the windows. He was polite, yes, but his gaze weighed value instead of memory. I tucked that observation away, too naive to imagine what it would mean later. Over the years, the beach house witnessed everything. Lauren's first heartbreak, she ran there with mascara streaked down her cheeks, sobbing in her room until Frank coaxed her out with cocoa. Her college acceptance letter. She read it aloud on the porch while the sea breeze lifted her hair. Her wedding shower, the house filled with ribbons, gifts, and laughter that rattled the rafters. All of it stitched into the wood, pressed into the sand, breathed into the salty air. And then there was Margaret, our neighbor of 40 years, who lived 3 doors down in a weathered blue cottage. She was 70 now, but her spirit had always been sharp. She would lean over the picket fence with a watering can in hand and say, "Kate, That daughter of yours is blessed. Not every child grows up with parents who build a whole world just for her. Her words were simple, but they carried the truth. Lauren was blessed. She had known safety, tradition, love. Margaret, widowed young, had raised 2 sons on scraps and long shifts at the diner. She admired what we had given Lauren, and she reminded me of it often. Those reminders feel like ghosts now. When Margaret's voice drifts back to me, "Kate, your girl is lucky," it strikes me harder than any insult. Because yes, Lauren was lucky. She had more than many children could dream of, and still, years later, she would pick up a phone and say with chilling ease, "I sold your beach house." The contrast is unbearable. For Margaret, that house was a symbol of devotion. For Frank and me, it was proof of perseverance. For Lauren, once upon a time, it had been heaven. And yet, in the end, she reduced it to a transaction. I can almost hear Margaret now, standing at the fence in her sun hat, shaking her head. If only she remembered how blessed she really was. I wish she had remembered, because the beach house was never just a house. It was our life's work, our gift, our legacy. And though Lauren forgot, I never did. I drove home in a quiet that felt heavier than the car itself. The late sun slid over the harbor and fell behind the roofs. I unlocked my door, stepped into the hushed house, and went straight to the bedroom. The oak dresser waited where it always had. Top drawer, right side, the manila envelope Frank pressed into my hands 3 days before he died. I set it on the quilt. The paper was thick, my name written in his careful block letters. For one long breath, I just looked at it, letting my shoulders settle. Outside, sunset threaded through the lace curtain and laid gold across the bed. I slid a fingernail under the flap. The glue released with a soft sigh. Inside were neatly tabbed documents and a notarized letter with Frank's signature, bold and certain. I lifted the first page. Articles of organization, Moore Coastal Holdings, LLC. Next, a deed transfer recorded 12 years ago, parcel number, legal description, surveys. A stamped map showing the house lot and the rear expansion. Order, intent, protection. At the bottom lay the letter. I unfolded it carefully. The paper remembered his hands. Frank's handwriting rose to meet me like the curve of his smile. "Kate, if you are reading this, I could not say all I wanted while I was still beside you. The beach house carries an outer title in our family name for appearances, but the company I formed holds the land, the structure, and the expanded rear lot. You are the sole heir and managing member. Do not let anyone tell you that you have nothing. You have shelter, ground, and standing." My throat tightened, not from fear, but from the relief of being known. For months I had been the woman people pitied in grocery aisles, the widow who forgot milk, the customer who counted change because her mind wandered. Yet here, in black ink, Frank had left me a map out of that smallness. I let the room slow. The lace breathed with the open window. The house creaked like an old violin. Dust floated in the gold as if time itself had softened. I laid the letter flat and pressed my palm to it. Warm paper, steadying pulse. Lauren's words knocked again. "We are leaving tomorrow. I sold your beach house." I pictured her holding a pen she had no right to hold, signing a contract that owned paint and shingles, not the ground, not the seawall, not the scrub of dune grass Frank bought when no one else noticed it was for sale. She had sold a silhouette. The body remained with me. A laugh escaped me, small at first, then fuller, the kind that arrives when truth stands up inside you. Tears followed, hot and clean. I was not crying for loss anymore. I was crying for recognition. The woman in this room was not a victim left behind. She was a steward, entrusted with a legacy built nail by nail, paragraph by paragraph. I read the letter again, slower. He had thought of everything. On a separate sheet, he had left simple instructions in his voice. Call Harris first. Check the safe deposit key in the blue tin on the closet shelf. Do not sign anything brought to you at the kitchen table. Take your time. Beneath the list, he had drawn a tiny lighthouse. The beam lines were crooked. Frank never could draw a straight line. He always said straight lines belong to rulers, not to people. I gathered the documents into a neat pile and slid them into a clean folder. Then I took out a yellow legal pad and wrote 3 lines. Call Harris, check safe deposit key, tea at dusk. The last line made me smile. Small rituals save us when big things try to break us. The sun dropped lower. The room turned honey-colored. I stood, wiped my face with the heel of my hand, and spoke into the quiet. "Frank, I found it." The house answered with a settling sigh. I returned the envelope to the drawer, not because I doubted what it contained, but because I knew I would need its calm again. As the light thinned, the next steps formed with a clean edge. I would not shout. I would not plead. I would walk, steady and quiet, through the path my husband left. Lauren believed she had emptied me. She had only opened a door she never knew existed. I turned toward the kitchen. The kettle would take its time to sing. I let my hands tremble for one last moment, then I drew a deeper breath, straightened my shoulders, and felt the tremble pass. The next morning, I tucked Frank's folder into my bag and walked 3 blocks to a brick building that once housed a bustling law office. Now only one name remained on the tarnished brass plaque: Harris and Moore. The other partners had long retired or passed on, but Harris still came in a few days each week, more out of habit than necessity. Harris was 75, his hair silver and thinning, his voice gravel-worn by decades in courtrooms. He had been Frank's closest friend since their Army days, and though he had officially retired, I knew he was the only man I could trust with these papers. When I stepped inside, he rose slowly from behind a desk littered with law journals and old photographs. "Kathleen," he said warmly, extending a hand that trembled only slightly. "I hoped I'd see you one day. Frank told me to expect you, though I prayed it wouldn't be so soon." I placed the folder on his desk. "I think it's time," I whispered. He adjusted his glasses and leafed through the documents with the precision of a man who had spent his life parsing words like scripture. His eyes moved across deeds, maps, corporate filings. Then he leaned back, exhaling a long breath. "Your daughter," he said carefully, "has signed papers for a sale she had no authority to make. What she sold was merely the outward deed, not the actual ownership. The property lies in this company Frank created. And you, Kathleen, are the sole beneficiary." I nodded, though my throat burned. Hearing it, confirmed by Harris, made it real. "She may believe she transferred value, but legally, she sold a shell," Harris continued. "The buyer will soon discover that. You have every right to file suit for fraud. In fact, if you wish, I can contact an attorney who still practices. We can bring a case against both Lauren and Edward. The law would be on your side." I sat very still, letting his words ripple through me. The law, the hammer, the gavel, all on my side. But as I pictured myself standing in a courtroom across from my daughter, my heart resisted. "Harris," I said finally, "I don't want the hammer. Not yet." He frowned. "She stole from you, Kathleen. She betrayed not only your trust, but Frank's legacy. Silence can sometimes look like surrender." I folded my hands on my lap, steadied my breath, and spoke slowly. "Sometimes silence carries more weight than a gavel. If I shout, she'll only hear the noise. But if I wait, if I let the truth reveal itself, she will hear the consequence." Harris studied me for a long moment. Then he smiled, faint but genuine. "You sound like Frank. He used to say a lighthouse never raised its voice. It just shone until ships adjusted their course." The image warmed me. A lighthouse, steady, wordless, guiding by presence alone. Harris slid the documents back into the folder and tapped the cover with his index finger. "You hold more than paper here. You hold leverage. If you wish to stay silent, I will respect that. But remember, silence is powerful only if it is chosen, not forced." "I choose it," I answered firmly. "I won't drag my daughter to court, but I will not rescue her from the tide she has chosen either." He nodded, closing the folder gently as if sealing a sacred pact. "Then my role is simple. I'll guard these papers, keep them in order, and when the moment comes, I'll be at your side. No questions, no judgments." I thanked him, rose, and walked to the door. Before I left, Harris called after me. "Kathleen, Frank trusted you with this because he knew your strength. Do not doubt it now." The street outside was busy with mid-morning errands, children tugging at mothers' skirts, men carrying coffee, cars inching through stoplights. I walked among them with the folder pressed to my chest, invisible yet unbroken. Lauren believed she had erased me with a phone call. Harris had shown me the truth. She had erased nothing. She had only revealed who she had become. And I, by choosing silence, had revealed who I still was. In the weeks that followed, I lived as two women. By day, I was the widow everyone pitied. Neighbors paused at the end of the walkway. Grocery clerks spoke in hushed tones. Church friends tilted their heads with that mixture of concern and relief that my tragedy was not theirs. I would smile softly, answer politely, and carry my bag of bread and milk as if I had nothing but time to fill. "Are you managing all right, Kathleen?" Mrs. Turner from across the street asked one morning while trimming her roses. "I'm fine, thank you," I replied, adjusting the brim of my hat. A gentle smile, a quiet nod, nothing more. Let them believe I was surviving on scraps of memory and kindness. But at night, when the curtains were drawn and the kettle whispered, I became someone else entirely. I spread Frank's documents across the kitchen table, yellow lamp lights spilling over deeds and maps. Harris called every other evening, his gravelly voice guiding me through legal language. We spoke of limited liability, inheritance law, clauses and subclauses. I wrote notes in the margins, my pen pressing hard as if anchoring myself to the page. The contrast was almost theatrical. By day, a frail widow in need of casseroles. By night, a silent strategist, sharpening knowledge Frank had left me. One evening, while tracing signatures on a deed, I remembered something I had long buried, the day Lauren slid papers across the kitchen table after Frank's funeral. "Mom," she had said gently, her hand covering mine, "this is just a power of attorney. It'll help me handle the insurance and bank accounts. You don't need to worry about the details. I'll take care of everything." Her voice had been honeyed with sympathy, her eyes glossy with rehearsed tears. I was still in black, my hands trembling from arranging flowers at the cemetery. I signed without reading, grateful to have a daughter who seemed ready to shoulder the load. Now, months later, under the lamp's glow, the memory hit me like a stone. That document had given her the authority to sell Frank's truck, to sign contracts, to play caretaker while plotting theft. I pressed my fist against my chest, not from weakness, but from the ache of recognition. The image of my daughter at the funeral, head bowed, veil brushing her cheek, collided with the voice on the phone. "We're leaving tomorrow, Mom. I've sold your beach house. Bye." It was not just betrayal. It was premeditated. She had used my grief as her tool. I sat there for a long time, the sound of the clock filling the silence. My pen slipped from my hand. Could a child betray her mother so easily? Could I have been so blind? The kettle whistled sharply, pulling me back. I poured the tea and whispered to the empty room, "If it were you, would you forgive her?" I imagined the question hanging above me, directed not only at myself, but at anyone listening to my story. Could forgiveness live in the same house as betrayal that deep? I sipped my tea, the heat burning my tongue, and left the question unanswered, because forgiveness was not a word I could spend lightly anymore. By day, I returned to the role, smiling at Margaret when she leaned over her fence. "Kate," she said, shaking her head, "you're strong. Lauren is lucky to have a mother like you." I bit my lip, forcing the corners of my mouth upward. Margaret did not know the truth, and I did not correct her. By night, I read Frank's letter again. His words steadied me. "Do not let anyone tell you that you have nothing." Lauren had tried. She had told me with her voice, her contracts, her false tears, that I had nothing left. But the ink on these pages, the soil beneath that beach house, the company Frank had built, they all testified otherwise. And I, Kathleen Moore, was no longer the woman who signed papers blindly. I was the woman who would decide, in silence, what forgiveness would mean. It happened on a bright afternoon that smelled of lilacs and salt air. Margaret came to my porch, apron still dusted with flour, her voice carrying a mix of gossip and concern. "Kate, you should have seen them," she said, her eyes narrowing in the way only a neighbor's eyes can. 2 suitcases each, rolling down the walk like a parade. Lauren in her cream jacket, Edward waving at the cab like he was hailing victory, laughing, whispering, "Not a glance back at your window." I listened, hands folded around my teacup. I had already seen it myself, the scene framed by my own kitchen window. Margaret didn't know I had stood there, still as a photograph, watching my daughter and the man she followed pull away from everything that had once held them. The cab door slammed, the engine coughed, luggage stacked like trophies in the trunk. Lauren tossed her hair, Edward leaned in for a kiss, and both disappeared inside, the glass swallowing their smiles. I waited for them to look up, for one small flicker of acknowledgement. Nothing. They never turned. Margaret sighed. "I thought maybe she'd wave. Maybe she'd nod to you at least. But she didn't, Kate. She didn't." I gave her the faintest smile. "That's all right, Margaret. They believe they're chasing Europe. Let them." She frowned, but I lifted my cup and took a long sip of tea, letting the heat fill the silence. From that window, I had watched Frank polish the truck every Sunday, watched Lauren take her first steps in the yard, watched seasons fold into decades. That glass had seen every form of devotion. Now it bore witness to departure without gratitude. And yet no ache rose in me, no collapse, no desperate rush to the door, only calm, sharper than grief, steadier than rage. Because I knew what Margaret did not. I knew what Lauren herself did not. The house they had sold was never theirs to sell. They could sign papers, cash checks, sip champagne on European balconies. But the soil beneath the porch, the deed sealed under more coastal holdings, the quiet rows of roses Frank planted along the fence, those still answered to me. I turned back from the window, set my cup gently on the saucer, and whispered to the empty kitchen, "The house was never theirs." The words echoed in my mind, as if Frank himself had spoken them. They felt like truth made solid, an anchor against the hollow noise of betrayal. Margaret shifted on the porch, clearly unsettled by my composure. "Kate, aren't you angry? I would be furious." I shook my head. "Anger feeds what doesn't deserve to grow. They will find their harvest soon enough." She pursed her lips, half in agreement, half in worry. "You're stronger than most of us." But strength was not the word I carried. It was clear, the clarity of someone who had been told she lost everything, only to discover she still held the root. That evening, I brewed another pot of tea and sat again at the window. The sun lowered itself over the street, washing the siding in orange light. I let myself smile, small, private, almost amused. Somewhere over the ocean, Lauren believed she had broken free. She thought she had stripped me down to nothing but pity and quiet halls. She thought she had sold her past and bought her future. I touched the rim of my cup, felt the warmth against my fingertips, and breathed deeply. She had forgotten the one thing I told her. The house was never hers. The house was never his. It was ours, Frank's and mine, and now mine, alone. The kettle clicked off in the kitchen, sharp and final. I rose, poured another cup, and carried it back to the window. Outside, Margaret was watering her roses, glancing toward my house as if expecting to see collapse. Instead, she saw me lift the cup in a calm salute, the steam curling like a secret she couldn't quite name, and in that silence, I felt no need to explain. It was Margaret again who first brought me the news. She came rushing across the yard one morning, apron still wet from her laundry line, eyes wide as if she had witnessed a storm. "Kate," she whispered, leaning over the porch rail, "my brother-in-law works at the bank downtown. He says Edward is in trouble. Heavy debts, bad loans, even forged signatures. And," she paused, her mouth tightening, "he left your Lauren. Ran off with some girl in Paris. Younger. Pretty, they say. Can you imagine?" I nodded slowly, though my hands gripped the arms of my chair. "Yes, Margaret, I can imagine." For days after, the phone began to ring more often. Anonymous numbers, professional voices. They asked Lauren more, demanding she make payments on overdue loans. Some hinted at court orders, others pressed for settlement. I listened politely, gave no explanations, and ended each call with the same quiet line. "This is not her residence at present." The truth was simple. Overseas, the dream had collapsed. Edward had drained what they thought they gained, and when the illusion cracked, he vanished. Lauren, left with debts she never understood, was cornered by creditors who saw her as easy prey. It was nearly midnight when she returned. I heard the cab long before I saw her. Headlights swept across the window and then the sound of a trunk slamming. I rose from my chair but did not move to the door. Instead, I stood at the kitchen counter, pouring hot water over 2 tea bags, letting the steam rise like a curtain. The knock was faint. When I opened the door, there she stood, my daughter, but not the daughter who had left. Her jacket hung loose, her hair uncombed, her eyes ringed with shadows. In one hand, she dragged a suitcase with a broken wheel. In the other, a tote split at the seam. She looked older, smaller, like a child who had played dress-up too long and now returned without costume. "Mom," she breathed. Voice cracked. I stepped aside. No words. She shuffled in, dropped the bags on the floor with a thud, and collapsed into a chair at the kitchen table. Her hands trembled against the wood. I placed a cup in front of her. She stared at it, eyes filling, then lifted it carefully. Steam curled into her face, softening the tightness around her mouth. She sipped, coughed once, then let out a long sigh. We did not speak. The clock ticked. The kettle settled. Somewhere outside, Margaret's dog barked once and fell silent again. Lauren finally whispered, "He's gone, Mom. Edward's gone. Took everything. Left me with nothing but these." She gestured toward the bags on the floor. I did not answer. Tears spilled over her cheeks, silent, hot, quick. She gripped the cup as if it were the only thing anchoring her. I thought he loved me. I thought Europe was our future. Still, I said nothing. She looked up at me then, her face breaking open, searching for anger or sympathy or perhaps judgment. She found only my silence. I sat across from her, lifted my own cup, and let the echo fill the room. The house was never theirs. In that silence, she began to understand. She sat at the table for a long time, her fingers wrapped around the cooling cup of tea. The suitcase with its broken wheel leaned against the wall, mute evidence of everything she had lost. I watched her chest rise and fall, shallow and uneven, as if even breathing had become a labor. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was small, careful, like a child asking permission. "Mom, could I stay here? Just for a little while. Just until I find a job and get back on my feet." I did not answer right away. I let the silence stretch. Not out of cruelty, but because silence has its own weight. In those quiet seconds, the past replayed itself. Her phone call from the clinic waiting room, her cheerful tone when she told me she had sold my house, the way she had hung up as if cutting a thread. I took a slow sip of my tea, set the cup down, and folded my hands. "Lauren," I said at last, my voice steady, "this door was never locked. You didn't need to beg to come back." Her eyes flickered with relief, but before she could speak, I continued, "But understand something. A home is more than walls, and love is not something to be traded for convenience. It must be valued, or it withers." Tears welled in her eyes again, this time not of desperation, but of recognition. She nodded quickly, as if agreeing to terms unspoken. "I know, Mom. I know I didn't value it. I didn't value you, but please, I'll do better. I'll find work. I'll pay for my own things." I leaned back in my chair, studying her face, the lines of exhaustion, the tremor in her lip, the faint pride still clinging to her even as everything else had collapsed. I felt no urge to shout, no need to remind her of her betrayals. The silence carried the message better than words ever could. "Go upstairs," I said finally. "Your room is the same as you left it." She hesitated, as if waiting for anger to erupt, for punishment to be declared. When none came, she rose shakily and carried her torn tote up the stairs. I listened to the sound of her footsteps, hesitant, almost reverent, until the door closed softly above. I remained at the kitchen table, finishing my tea. The clock ticked on, indifferent. The steam had thinned to nothing. This was not forgiveness. Not yet. It was a shelter offered without conditions, without accusation, but also without illusion. She could live under my roof again, but she would have to learn what it meant to honor the roof that covered her. The words I had spoken lingered in the air like incense. The door was never locked, but love must be cherished. I let that line settle into me, into the walls, into the silence of the night. It would become the echo she would hear, long after the tea was gone and the house grew still. The days settled into a strange rhythm. Lauren rose early, dressed in borrowed clothes that no longer fit quite right, and went out with a folder of resumes. She returned in the afternoons with the same folder untouched, her shoulders sagging lower each day. At first, she spoke of hope. They said they'll call me. Later, only silence. The calls never came. I knew why. The whispers from the banks had already spread. Her name carried debt like a shadow. No company wanted to risk her presence. No employer wanted the complications of garnished wages or lawsuits. Doors closed before she even reached them. One evening, she came home with her eyes red but her voice steady. "I found something, Mom. It isn't much. Night cleaning, downtown offices, minimum wage, no questions asked." I only nodded and poured her tea. She looked almost grateful for the lack of response. Perhaps she feared pity more than poverty. The first night she came back near dawn, smelling of dust and disinfectant. Her hands were raw, nails broken. I waited at the table, the lamp casting its pool of light. She sat heavily, too tired for words, and stared at the steam rising from her cup. It was only later, after several shifts, that she told me about Mrs. Johnson. "She's 60, Lauren said quietly one morning, stirring sugar into her tea. "She's been cleaning those offices for 20 years. Her husband left when her children were small. She raised them alone. Can you imagine that, Mom?" I looked at her but said nothing. Lauren continued, her voice carrying a kind of reluctant respect. "She told me something last night. She said there are two kinds of people who end up doing this work. The ones who never had a chance, and the ones who had every chance but threw it away." Her eyes flickered up to mine, wet but clear. "I'm in the second group, Mom. I had everything. I had you, I had Dad, I had a home, and I wasted it. I gave it all to a man who only wanted to drain me dry." Her voice broke on the last words, and she pressed her palms against her face. I did not move to comfort her. Instead, I let the silence hold her confession. She needed to say it, to hear it out loud, to sit in the truth of it. When she lowered her hands, she looked years older, but there was something steadier in her expression. "Mrs. Johnson said knowing which group you're in is the first step. At least I know. Most people never admit it." I traced the rim of my cup with one finger, remembering Frank's words, his letter, his careful foresight. This was what he wanted, to protect me, yes, but also to force our daughter to confront who she really was. Lauren leaned back in her chair, exhausted but strangely calm. "It's strange, Mom. I feel lower than I've ever felt. But for the first time in years, I think I see myself clearly." I said only one thing, softly but firmly. "Clarity is the beginning, not the end." She nodded, eyes brimming again, but this time the tears did not fall. She stood, gathering her worn jacket, ready to sleep before another shift. Her footsteps on the stairs were heavy but not hopeless. I sat alone in the kitchen, letting her words echo. Two kinds of people. And she knew which one she was. For the first time, I believed she might yet climb back from rock bottom. It was a rainy afternoon when Lauren appeared at the kitchen doorway, holding something in her hand. Her face was pale, her eyes unsettled. "Mom," she said quietly, "I found this in the bottom of Edward's old suitcase. It has your name on it." She placed a small envelope on the table. My breath caught. The handwriting was unmistakable. Frank's. With trembling fingers, I opened it. Inside was a short letter and a small brass key, dull from years hidden. The letter was simple, written in Frank's steady hand. "Kathleen, if you are reading this, then the first envelope has already been opened. This key belongs to Safety Deposit Box number 247, Downtown Bank. Inside is something that may help you help her, but use it wisely." Lauren leaned closer, her voice tinged with desperate hope. "Mom, Do you know what this means? Dad must have left something else. Maybe money. Maybe documents. This could solve everything. The next morning, we went to the bank together. I watched her clutch the key in her hand as though it were a lifeline. The clerk checked my ID, disappeared for a moment, then returned with a long metal box. We carried it to a small private room. I slid the lid open slowly, as if unveiling another part of Frank's heart. Inside lay velvet pouches, neatly tied, and small envelopes with his handwriting marking each piece. Emerald earrings, a pearl necklace, diamond rings, heirlooms from his family, and gifts he had purchased quietly over the years. At the bottom, a letter noted their approximate value, $200,000. Lauren gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Mom, this is a fortune. We can sell these, pay off the worst of the debts, maybe even clear my name with the banks." I said nothing. She lifted a necklace, holding it against the light, her eyes filling with something like relief. "Do you see, Mom? Maybe it's not too late. Maybe Dad planned this for me." Still, I said nothing. My gaze rested on her trembling hands, the way she measured jewels against imagined numbers, not memories. To me, each piece carried years of sacrifice, anniversaries marked with modest gifts, traditions carefully preserved. To her, they were currency to cover Edward's sins. She looked up at me, pleading. "I know you think I'm wrong, but what choice do I have? These debts are mine now. If I don't pay them, they'll come for everything. At least this way, I can breathe again." I folded the letter slowly, placed it back into the box, and closed the lid. "We will take it home," I said simply. On the walk back, she clutched the box tightly, as though she feared it might vanish. Her voice carried fragments of plans: who might buy, how much the stones could fetch, which creditors might be satisfied first. I let her speak. That evening, the jewels lay spread across the kitchen table, glittering under the light. Lauren bent over them, scribbling figures onto a notepad, whispering to herself, "If I sell the emeralds and the pearl set, that should cover half. The rings might clear the rest." I watched from across the table, tea cooling in my hand. My silence spoke louder than correction, because I knew she had not yet learned. To her, this treasure was rescued. To me, it was a test. She looked up once, eyes shining. "Mom, don't you see? Dad left these so I could get out of this hole." I did not answer. Instead, I let the echo of Frank's warning fill my mind. Use it wisely. She believed she had found her salvation. I knew she had only been handed another lesson. Harris called early that week. His voice on the phone was measured, professional, but with a gravity that told me something had shifted. "Kathleen, I think it's time you and Lauren both come to my office. There are matters that need to be made clear." We arrived on a gray Thursday morning. The office was in an old brick building downtown, its wooden floors creaking under every step. Harris greeted us with a polite nod, then gestured toward 2 chairs across from his desk. Lauren clutched her purse as if bracing for another blow. I sat calmly, hands folded in my lap. He opened a thick folder, his glasses slipping low on his nose. "First, Miss Moore," he said, turning to my daughter, "I want to address the issue of your debts. After thorough investigation, we've confirmed Edward forged several of your signatures. These loans, these obligations, they are not legally yours." Lauren blinked, leaning forward. "Are you saying I don't have to pay?" "That is correct," Harris replied. "The banks will be notified. You will not carry the burden of Edward's deceit." She let out a sound halfway between a sob and a laugh, her shoulders trembling. "I thought I was ruined. I thought my life was over." Harris closed that section of the file, then reached for another, thicker one. His expression shifted, respectful now, almost reverent. "Now, Mrs. Moore, this next matter concerns you directly." He laid out documents across the desk, property deeds, company shares, investment certificates. I recognized Frank's handwriting in the margins, his care in every line. Harris looked from Lauren to me. "Everything here confirms what your late husband arranged. The company he built owns multiple properties, accounts, assets. And Kathleen, you are the sole heir." Lauren's face was drained of color. She stared at the papers, lips moving but no words coming out. Finally, she turned to me. "Mom, you knew? You knew all this time?" I met her eyes, steady. "Yes." Her hands slammed against the desk, rattling. "The papers. Then why? Why did you let me suffer, begging for work, scrubbing floors at night, selling those jewels like a fool? Why didn't you tell me?" The room fell quiet except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. Harris shifted uneasily, but I raised a hand to still him. This was not his moment. I leaned forward, my voice calm, almost gentle. "Because, Lauren, mirrors don't hang in the clouds. They sit at the bottom. Only when you reach the lowest place do you see yourself clearly." Her mouth opened, then closed again. She dropped back into her chair, tears gathering. "So, all this time, you were testing me?" "Not testing," I corrected softly. "Allowing you to see. Allowing you to live with the consequences of your choices until the reflection could no longer be ignored." She wiped her eyes roughly, frustration mixing with grief. "Do you know how it felt, Mom? To think I'd lost everything, to feel the world laugh at me, to be invisible?" I reached for one of Frank's letters on the desk, slid it toward her. "Yes, I know, because that is what you made of me when you sold my house with a single phone call. You reduced me to nothing in your eyes, and only by being stripped down yourself could you understand the wound you left behind." Lauren bowed her head, silent tears dripping onto the polished wood. Harris cleared his throat, his voice softer now. "Miss Moore, your mother has every right to reclaim what was taken, yet she chose not to drag you into court, not to shame you publicly. She chose silence." I placed my hand lightly over hers. "Silence, Lauren, can be heavier than a gavel, and it was silence I carried until you were ready to hear the truth." She looked up at me then, her eyes raw, searching, as though seeing her mother for the first time. Even after Harris cleared her debts and the banks withdrew their claims, Lauren kept rising before dawn, tying her worn sneakers and leaving for the night cleaning job. One morning, I asked gently, "You don't have to anymore, you're free." She shook her head, pulling her jacket tight. "No, Mom. Freedom doesn't mean going back to the easy way. I need to earn the right to stand on my own feet. Every shift, every paycheck, it reminds me that I can. I have to build back my life, one opportunity at a time." Her voice did not carry despair this time. It carried resolve. I didn't answer. I simply watched as she walked down the path, her head held lower but steadier than it had been in years. There was pride in my chest, but I kept it quiet. Some things grow stronger when left unspoken. Weeks passed. She returned from work tired, but her greetings changed. She no longer entered the house with a huff of entitlement. She placed her shoes neatly by the door, whispered thanks when I poured her tea, smiled faintly before climbing the stairs. Small gestures, yet each one marked a new chapter. It was Margaret, my old neighbor, who put words to what I dared not say aloud. One afternoon, she joined me on the porch, her knitting needles clicking softly. She looked down the street where Lauren was unloading groceries from a modest bag. "Kate," Margaret said, her voice carrying that mix of bluntness and care only an old friend can have. "Your girl is different now." I raised an eyebrow, letting her continue. "She used to pass me without a nod, eyes in the clouds, no time for anyone. But yesterday, she stopped when I dropped my cane, picked it up, looked me in the eye, and said thank you when I wished her well. Do you hear me? Thank you. Your Lauren never used to say thank you." I kept my hands wrapped around my teacup, letting the warmth seep into my palms. Margaret's words sank into me, confirming what I had begun to notice. "She knows how to bend her head now," Margaret continued. "That's not a weakness. That's wisdom. Took her long enough." I smiled faintly. Yes, took her long enough. That evening, Lauren returned from work with a small envelope of pay in her hand. She laid it on the table. "I'll pay my part of the groceries, Mom." I looked at her, but said nothing. Instead, I slid the envelope back toward her. She frowned, confused. "Not yet," I said. "Save it. One day you'll know what to do with it." Her eyes softened, and for once she didn't argue. She tucked the envelope into her pocket, and in that silence, something passed between us. Something stronger than apology, stronger than words. Margaret was right. My daughter was different. And though I never spoke it aloud, in the quiet of my heart, I allowed myself to feel proud. The day we drove back to the beach house, the air smelled of salt and second chances. Lauren sat beside me in the old truck, silent, her hands folded tightly in her lap. When we pulled up, she didn't move at first. She just stared at the small, cream-colored house with its porch overlooking the sea, the house she once sold away without a backward glance. When we finally stepped inside, she stopped in the living room, her eyes darting from the familiar walls to the worn floorboards. Suddenly, she broke down, her sobs raw and unguarded. "Mom," she whispered through her tears, "I'm so sorry. Not just for selling it, but for stripping it of everything it meant to us. I didn't see, I didn't care, and I hate myself for it." I stood quietly, letting her cry. The echo of Frank's voice filled the room in my memory, his laughter, his steady hands fixing the railing. This house had carried more than walls and roof. It carried decades of summers, birthdays, Christmas mornings. Lauren wiped her face and turned toward me, her voice steadier now. "Mom, maybe this house can mean something again, not just for us, but for others. What if we turned it into a shelter, a place where women left behind, women with nowhere to go, could stay until they find their footing?" Her eyes pleaded, but this time not for herself. This time it was for strangers who might need the very refuge she had once taken for granted. I walked slowly across the room, ran my hand along the familiar mantel, then looked back at her. "Lauren, the most beautiful house," I said softly, "is the house with open doors." She nodded, a tearful smile breaking across her face. That afternoon we worked side by side. We pulled the dusty boxes from closets, aired out the rooms, and hung back the old curtains that had been folded away for years. As we pinned the fabric in place, the sea breeze flowed in and sunlight poured through the windows, scattering gold across the wooden floor. For a moment, I stood still, holding the curtain cord, watching my daughter in the glow of that light. She looked different here, humbled, softened, but also renewed. And in that quiet, I knew Frank would have approved. He had always believed a home was not complete until it sheltered more than its own. The beach house was no longer just our past. It had become a promise for others, a place where broken hearts might mend, where silence could be safe instead of punishing. Together, with the ocean as our witness, we began again. That evening, after a long day of dusting, scrubbing, and hanging those familiar curtains, I carried a cup of tea out to the porch. The ocean stretched endlessly before me, steady in its rhythm, as if reminding me that life always flows forward no matter the storms that come. I lowered myself into the chair Frank had built with his own hands, the wood worn smooth by years of evenings like this. I sipped the tea slowly. Its warmth spread through me, grounding me in the present. Above my head, the porch light flicked on, its glow soft but unwavering. For a moment, I closed my eyes and heard Frank's voice again. He used to say, "A lighthouse doesn't need to shout across the waves. It doesn't need to prove its strength. It just needs to stand steady, shining for those who have lost their way." That was what he had been for me. And perhaps, in some quiet way, that was what I had become for Lauren. Not the rescuer rushing into the storm, but the steady light waiting at the shore. Lauren stepped out then, her hands still damp from the dishes. She looked at the horizon with a new calm in her face. There were lines of fatigue, yes, but also lines of growth, etched by the nights she had struggled and the mornings she had risen again. She didn't speak, and I didn't press her to. We shared the silence, the hum of the waves filling the space between us. Inside, the house smelled faintly of lemon polish and sea air. The curtains swayed gently, the old rooms breathing again. I thought of all the birthdays we had celebrated there, the laughter that had once echoed against those walls, the heartbreak of watching it nearly lost, and then the relief of knowing it had never truly been gone. As the sky darkened, I whispered into the dusk more to myself than to anyone else. This house was never theirs. It has always remained with those who know how to cherish it. The echo of my own words settled in the night air. Final, yet freeing. I glanced at the porch light again. Its glow was simple, ordinary, but it was enough. Enough to remind me that quiet strength carries further than anger ever could. Enough to assure me that healing doesn't come in a rush. It arrives in steady beams, guiding us back home. So now I ask you, listening to my story, if you were in my place, would you let your child fall to the bottom and climb out on their own? Or would you rush in to save them at the first slip? Tell me in the comments. I want to know your truth, and share the city you're listening from so this porch light of mine can reach across the map and touch yours. Because stories, like homes, are meant to be shared. And sometimes, all it takes is one steady light in the dark to remind us that it is never too late to begin again.